What we're going to talk about today is wetlands that are built specifically to clean a variety of kinds of wastewater. And we're going to look at, in general, how natural wetlands occur and work, but more specifically how wetland plants clean water. And then we'll look at things going on around Alabama. And I developed this talk after my son did a science project on constructed wetlands and used one western end of Birmingham, and he and I had never heard of constructed wetlands. And he gathered so much information about what was going on around Alabama that I hated to go to waste, so I turned it into a presentation. And I've been keeping it updated ever since. About a month ago, I was in Auburn and took some pictures of the Camp Hill wetlands. You'll see there's just up 280 here. So anytime we go on a vacation, I'm always stopping and photographing and recording the wetlands. Just a simple definition of what a wetland is came from the Birmingham News several years ago. Wetlands are swamps, bogs, marshes, and other land that is underwater long enough to support plants that grow wholly or partly in water. Any definition of a wetland has three components. It's a place that has wetland soil, and it's a specific kind of soil called hydric soil, and it has wetland plants and exhibits wetland water characteristics or hydrology. Natural wetlands especially are aquatic systems that are between the land environment and the deeper water environment, and they improve water quality while providing a wildlife habitat. Wetlands are an edge habitat or transition zone between the land and the water. The official definition of wetlands from the Army Corps of Engineers and EPA, wetlands are areas that are inundated or saturated by surface or groundwater at a frequency and duration sufficient to support and that under normal circumstances do support a prevalence of vegetation typically adapted for life in saturated soil conditions. So here you see the three components: the water, type of vegetation, and type of soil. Especially on natural wetlands, as I said, they're edge habitat and edge environment between the upland, the drier land, and then the deep water of a lake or a creek, river, the Gulf, etc. One of the things that the wetland does is to recharge the groundwater and to allow the runoff water to slowly soak into the ground instead of continuing quickly to the rivers, and they provide a reduction in flooding as they do that. Three types of wetland plants. One is floating, like water hyacinths, duckweed, that floats on top of the water, puts its roots down into the water, and that's where the cleaning is taking place. There are submergents that grow wholly underneath the surface of the water. They may have their root system attached into the earth underneath the water. And then there are emergents that have their roots in the soil under the water and then emerge, therefore emergence, out of the surface of water, and you see them up above like cattails and rushes and reeds. Examples of the types and values of natural wetlands: the salt marshes along the coast. We're probably very familiar with that. But virtually all of the forested areas of Alabama and the southeast are classified as wetland areas because the soil is moist enough to have this characteristic. And I've been canoeing on the Cahaba, got out to eat lunch, walk up in the woods, and there's pitcher plants growing in amongst the trees. So forested areas are classified. Prairie potholes in the Midwest are the little farm ponds, as we call them here, that were created when the glaciers receded. And Minnesota is known as the land of 10,000 lakes. But as those are being reduced, the size of them being filled in for agricultural purposes, then it's causing flooding up in the Midwest because water goes directly to the Mississippi River and doesn't have a chance to soak in slowly. The tundra of Alaska is classified as wetland. The water is frozen in the ground, but it's still water, and so that's a major wetland area. Just the values of natural wetlands and threatened and endangered plant and animal species depend upon them for their life cycles. The coastal fisheries, or the wetlands along the Gulf areas and the coastal areas are the nursery areas for those fisheries. Eat or be eaten at the Wetlands Cafe. This is sort of the web of life here. And you start with the algae and detritus and bacteria and all that occur. And then as you move up the food chain, breaking any part of the food chain here, of course, affects the other parts and may indeed affect us and the higher order animals. This is often what we do to our natural wetlands. This is at Dauphin Island. There's a bridge over to Dauphin Island. We use them as dumping areas, and the staff of the Dauphin Island Sea Lab have to come into this wetland and clean it out every once in a while. Since we started settling this country, we've lost over half of our natural wetlands that are being destroyed at a rate of 35 acres an hour. There's a long list, about 200 pages, Department of Agriculture on the internet, that you can get all the different species and varieties of wetland plants. But I like this list of about 70 of the major ones that people know a lot about, because it breaks it into the different types of wetlands. You've got the emergents, freshwater marsh emergent plants, various ones that you may have heard of. The submerged, such as wild celery, waterweed, etc. And then the floating, such as water hyacinths and duckweed. And then the bottomland forested wetlands. Remember I said virtually all of the forested areas in this around here are wetlands. And a lot of them you would think about, willows and sweet gum, things like that. But there are a lot of trees that we don't realize or think about as being wetland plants. But indeed they are. Then the deep water swamps, salt marshes, and mangrove swamps. Just look at a typical wetland plant. These are cattails, very prolific all around in this area, even up into Wisconsin and the northern part of the United States. A lot of people don't realize that the brown part here that looks like a hot dog stuck on the stalk is the flower of the cattail. And if you, at the right time of year, if you pinch off a piece of it and throw it to the wind, the seeds fly to the wind. So that's one of the ways that cattails propagate themselves. But they also, as we'll see later, stick out a runner, and a new plant comes up and sticks out a runner and a new plant. So two different ways. As an aside, all parts of a cattail are edible. There's recipes, there's ways to eat all the different parts. Just to show you some of the pretty flowers that are available if you're going to put in a constructed wetland, then you're actually putting in a wildflower garden. Pepperell weed, water hyacinths in bloom, and this is actually at a constructed wetland cleaning wastewater at Enterprise, Alabama, in bloom. And then duckweed. Duckweed is the world's smallest flowering plant, and it has the world's smallest fruit. You can see compared to the eye of a needle here how tiny that is. And I have just found out that North Carolina State University is doing research growing duckweed on wastewater, and they're planning to try harvesting that and turning it into biofuels. Just like corn is being turned into biofuels, they're planning to try that with duckweed. The way that wetland plants clean wastewater, we've got a wastewater stream coming in, and you'll see a whole variety of types of wastewater, and it may have organic material, nitrogen, phosphorus, solids, metals, and naturally occurring bacteria. So what happens is you want to clean the water while it's in the wetland, and the way that happens a lot is down in the root system. But also, wetland plants are unique in three ways. One is that they will take a lot of the heavy metals up into the plant material and will hold them there and take them, therefore, out of the environment, out of the waste stream of water. Another way that wetland plants function is they take the toxic material, the pollutants, up into the plant and create biomass. The plant grows. This is fertilizer for the plant in a lot of instances. And then in the process of creating biomass, they transpire out of the plant the oxygen, carbon dioxide, nitrogen as non-toxic compounds out into the air. The third way that wetland plants are unique is that this naturally occurring bacteria is aerobic bacteria, and that means it functions in the presence of oxygen. It has no odor, so a wetland has no odor, but you've got to get that oxygen down to that bacteria down in the root system. And the way that the plant does that is pumps oxygen down through the plant into the root system and out into the area around the roots for that bacteria to function. If you have anaerobic bacteria, it functions in the absence of oxygen and it stinks. That's the smelly bacteria. But aerobic bacteria needs that oxygen and it functions with oxygen and has no odor. And then what you got coming out is treated water. So you have eliminated from the environment the wastewater and treated it naturally. Constructed wetlands are sort of a subdiscipline of what's called phytoremediation. Phyto meaning plants, remediation meaning cleaning up something in the environment. And so there's a lot of use of plants, not just in water conditions like wetlands, but also in soils to use the plants to clean up toxic material in the environment. Willow trees will remove silver, ferns arsenic, alpine herbs hoard zinc, mustard plants lead, Indian mustard gold, clovers oil, and poplar trees are very effective at destroying dry cleaning solvents that are down in the groundwater and in the soil. In fact, people in the phytoremediation business call a stand of poplars is a self-assembling, solar-powered pump and treat system, all done naturally. This is a Superfund site, not wetland plants, but just to show you the example of phytoremediation, you can see that the Superfund site is too toxic for humans, but the plants are thriving there and are cleaning up the toxic material. Just some examples. In California, there's an oil refinery, and its waste stream has a whole lot of selenium in it, and it's toxic to the environment. But nearby there are crops that need more selenium as a fertilizer. And so what they've done is they've planted cattails in the waste stream of the oil refinery. The cattails take the selenium up into the plant. They harvest the plants. They shred the material, spread it on the crops. And so here they have moved a toxic material naturally over to somewhere where it can be beneficial. In Georgia and Tennessee, there are plants that are cleaning TNT and decomposing that. And in the Ukraine, when the Chernobyl nuclear power plant blew, it polluted with radioactive waste all of the ponds in that area. So what they've done is they've come in and they've taken styrofoam rafts and planted sunflowers in them, and they float on the ponds with the roots sticking down, and it's actually cleaning the radioactive waste out of those ponds. If we look at North America, the black areas are the major wetland areas throughout North America. When my son got this for his science project, I was really surprised at how much was in the northern part of North America. I just thought more of wetlands being in the warm areas, wetland plants, cattails. But indeed, you can see a tremendous amount going on up in the northern areas. And what this also tells us, you can see virtually all of the southeast is major wetland areas. So if we're going to put in a constructive wetland in Alabama, we're in the right good climate to do it. We got the right plants to do it. They're going to thrive because we're a major wetland area. To look at the two different types of constructive wetlands, a lot of them we think of as cells. They look out and it looks like little farm ponds with a spillway in between each one of them. They're called cells, and so you bring the wastewater in. It flows in the cell around the plant roots, goes through over the spillway into the next cell, a series of cells like that, and then comes out as clean water. But if you're in South Alabama, Florida, somewhere where the soil does not really have a clay layer to build a little farm pond, it won't hold the water, then you can put in a rock reed filter. You come in and you dig a hole, and then you line that with plastic liner, and then you put pea gravel or crushed rock in it. And you actually plant the plant roots in that pea gravel or crushed rock. You don't need any soil. And you bring the wastewater in, and it trickles in amongst the root system where the bacteria are, where it's getting the oxygen, and it flows out as cleaned water. And this is called a rock reed filter because you're using rock as a medium, and reeds are the type of plants that you're using. Another way to look at that is a subsurface flow. A rock reed filter is a subsurface flow because the surface of the water is about 2 to 3 inches underneath the surface of the rock, so you don't see the water standing there. Then a surface flow is the type where you look out and see little ponds, so that's a surface flow. But more and more, they're permitting natural wetlands, bringing in wastewater to natural wetlands. Can anybody tell me what kind of trees these are? Cypress, very good. Cypress trees are a wetland plant. They do all the functions of wetland plants. They pump the oxygen down into the root system, and so they're a major wetland plant. There's some examples from around the world of natural wetlands that were occurring near mining sites. And what they did was they brought the waste stream from the mining operation into the natural wetland because it was already there, so they utilized it, and are cleaning up the material that is part of the mining process. You can see some pretty nasty stuff that the wetlands are actually cleaning out of the process. Somebody that was telling me that up in one of the States, Montana, somewhere up where they have these huge surface mines. They did this in order to see if the plants would pull up the material that they were mining there on site. They did, and indeed, the plants also pulled out gold, and they didn't even know they had gold on site. So again, the plants are very effective in pulling the heavy metals out of the environment. The Living Technologies is a company that says they can put in a constructed wetland anywhere in the world to clean wastewater, and they've done it all over the world. This is in Nevada. See, they came in and put vats with various types of plants cleaning the water. And then here, a lot of times they will put a greenhouse if it's up north where they want longer growing season. They're using water hyacinths in a greenhouse up north, different varieties of plants. This is in Maryland. What kind of trees? Cypress. Okay, they put vats with cypress trees in a big greenhouse to clean the water. So how did all this start in the United States? Back in the mid-'70s, Bill Wolverton was an employee down at Stennis Space Center, and he was given the assignment, I was down in South Mississippi on the way to New Orleans, he was given the assignment to come up with some way to clean wastewater on long space flight journeys, like going to Mars and back takes 2 years, so you got to, clean the water up. And so he had heard of constructed wetlands being used in Europe, so he brought the technology over here, and he built 4 constructed wetland systems on the Stennis Space Center property. And since the mid-'70s, those have been the entire cleaning of sewage for that 4,000-person facility at Stennis Space Center. Later they added a welcome center out at one of the entrances. They just put a little constructed wetland right next to it to handle that water. This is pictures from one of his 4 systems. The first cell is the water hyacinths cell, floating plants, and then I'm standing on the dam between the first cell behind me and the second cell. You can see the reeds and rushes. And then the third cell in all of his is duckweed only. And you may have seen duckweed and didn't realize you were seeing it. A lot of times on still water, a pond or something, you'll see a scum, what looks like a scum, but if you throw a stick or rock in, it separates from surface tension, and that's duckweed, the small floating plant. He lives in Picayune, Mississippi, near Stennis Space Center, and so he came in on the bottom floor of his house, brought the water from the toilet into a constructed wetland completely inside the house, completely enclosed in the house. There's no odor, remember, with the wetland. Water goes through there and is cleaned and then goes to provide the water for his aquarium. He also went up in northeast Mississippi. They're building a community college, they're building a science building. So he came in on the second floor and they put in a constructed wetland cleaning the water coming out of the restrooms, completely wholly enclosed. The water then leaves the wetland as clean and goes out to used to water the outside shrubbery. Also near Picayune is the Crosby Arboretum. Excuse me. There's a restroom, public restroom right here. And so what they do here is they bring the water from the restroom out to a constructed wetland. It's a subsurface flow, so you don't see the water standing there. They're an arboretum, a plant facility. So they have a sign here explaining to people that the water you just got rid of in the restroom is now being cleaned by these plants. This is in Raleigh, North Carolina. An office building brings the water out of the office building into wetland cells interspersed with a patio and walkway, and the staff eat their lunches out here in amongst the wetland. And then the water leaves the wetland and goes to provide water for the toilets and for irrigating the lawn. This is a little bit of an aside, but this is a person who does large-scale outdoor art, and up in Toronto. And what he's done is he's built these elephant-looking structures with wetlands on top. And what he's doing is he's bringing the polluted water from this river up by solar, the pumps are run by solar energy, up to the wetlands here, and then he cleans those and the water goes back into the river as cleaned water. But the people on the highway can enjoy his artwork there as they drive by. So if we look at a comparison between a wetland natural type system and a conventional sewage treatment system, a conventional system is very expensive. You've got concrete, steel, electricity, and chemicals as your input. It's very fossil fuel intensive. Uses the naturally occurring microbes, the bacteria, but you've got to pump oxygen down into that wastewater to feed that bacteria. So again, that's fossil fuel intensive. But if you put in a natural system, the inputs are sun, wind, land, and seeds, all of which are free. It's a little bit land intensive. You've got to have room to put the ponds out there. But it's also using soil, plants, and microbes, which are free. One of the quotes that my son got during this project was that small towns can put in a constructed wetland about 40% the cost of a conventional sewage treatment plant. This comparison, one that Bill Wolverton did in Mississippi. Union, Mississippi had an obsolete mechanical wastewater system. They were considering modifications to that or a new mechanical system, and he proposed a new artificial marsh treatment system, another name for a constructed wetland. If we just compare a new system to a constructed wetland, the construction cost alone is a sizable difference, $1.2 million versus $450,000. The annual ongoing every year operation and maintenance, $55,000 versus $2,000. Electricity alone, $60 versus $300. Can you imagine which one they chose? Okay. Then up in the northern part of the United States, use duckweed systems a lot. Here's one from North Dakota, probably as cold as I'd ever want to go in the United States, and from Wisconsin, where they have duckweed systems being used up there. Now, if we look closer to home, to Alabama, these dots represent constructed wetlands for cleaning a variety of types of wastewater, and it doesn't represent the number of them, because some of them, like one dot down here, represents 8 different ones at a subdivision. Up here on Sand Mountain, one dot represents 14 of them. So it's not the number, but it just shows you the distribution literally all the way from the Dauphin Island Sea Lab estuarium there on Dauphin Island to the northern part of the state, east and west borders. We've got constructed wetlands all over. And I'm still visiting some. This is a map on the door at my at home with ones that I still need to visit and to record with photographs. So if we look at the different types of constructed wetlands, wastewater, we may have a home site. You still need a septic tank. But instead of coming out with field lines in the backyard, you may have failed field lines. Instead of digging up the whole backyard, you can abandon those and put in a flower garden instead. Okay, so it's a constructed wetland. You also may have a sloped backyard that's too steep to put field lines. You can come in, put a flat area, put a constructed wetland, cleaning the water from the home. We'll look at some examples of home sites, ones with asterisks or ones we will see pictures of, but the one you see there are other ones here throughout Alabama and other areas, and some subdivisions and dormitories. This is a typical single family in Ozark. Got a septic tank here. It flows by gravity feed down to canna lilies, flower garden in the backyard. This person, I understand, up in the Decatur area, he did a lot of the work himself, dug the hole, put the lining in, put the cross ties, planted the plants. It only cost him about $500 for his entire sewage treatment system. Then this is an example of one of the homes up on Sand Mountain. They had failed septic systems or no septic system. The health department found that one of the homes just had a pipe disappearing out into the woods, and that was their septic system. So they didn't have a lot of money to spend, and so they came in, and the health department and TVA put in flower gardens for these people, and they were able to maintain those. They're constructed wetlands. The Melanie Johns and Richard Johns up on the Locust Fork, right next to Locust Fork, they had their gray water separated already, so they brought their gray water into a little constructed wetlands, and they're plant people, so it just blends right in with the rest of the plants in their yard. The dormitory, the Weeks Bay National Estuarine Reserve facility, they built a new 2-story dormitory. They needed to clean that water. This is a ramp going up to the 2nd floor. And so they put in a 2-cell constructed wetland. If you notice, these plants are thriving, right? They've got a lot of fertilizer. Remember, this wastewater coming out of the dormitory is fertilizer for the plants. And so they've got a lot of water and a lot of fertilizer, so they're thriving. But this visually shows you, one, that the wetland is working, and two, that it's removing the toxic material from the environment. One of the goals of wastewater treatment should be to remove that stuff out of the environment. So the plants have actually taken that waste material up into the plants, built plant material, removed the water, transpired it into the atmosphere. Cell 2, the plants are really sucking. They don't have as much fertilizer coming to them. They don't have as much water, and so they're really struggling. So, but visually you can see that it's working. And then this is on the Fish River just north of Weeks Bay. You can see it was Christmas time. The plants look like they've gone dormant, but they still function as wetland plants. And these people are located right on the Fish River. So whatever happens in their backyard directly affects the river. And so what they did, they're plant people. They've got plants all over the backyard. So they came in and added landscape timbers around the edge of the constructed wetland and planted non-wetland plants to blend right in with their wetland plants. So they increased the size of their flower garden. This is across Fish River. There's several houses in the Mockingbird Lane area. Can you tell which is cell 1 and cell 2? Okay. You notice there's no fences around these. Kids can play. It's not dangerous. The material gets cleaned very quickly, and so there's no problem there. This is the Delta Port area subdivision just north of Dauphin Island. The houses are naturally built up because it floods there. Whenever there's a storm out in the Gulf, the water comes up and floods, so they're able to bring it down by gravity feed into a constructed wetland. This is actually 3 cells, and you can see the third cell here has not got as many plants in it. This is a subdivision, and the house here and the one behind me went in together to build a constructed wetland and use it together, so it's economies of scale. Can you tell which is cell 1 and cell 2? I'll get off that. Okay. This is examples of towns in Alabama that have constructed wetlands, cleaning all the wastewater. We'll see these, and then just to show you, there's quite a few more. And I understand in England, Prince Charles has one on his organic farm, on his estate at Highgrove, and that constructed wetlands are required for any town of 3,000 or less population instead of a regular conventional wastewater treatment plant. And large cities that have a whole lot of water to take care of, they actually can polish the water that's coming out of the sewage treatment plant before it goes in the river to clean it further, because what we put in the rivers is actually not cleaned water. So just look at some of those towns. Enterprise, they had a lagoon. When the Clean Water Act came along, the lagoon was not cleaning the water well enough, and it stinks. It's aerobic and anaerobic bacteria, and those stink. So what they did is they added 2 hyacinth cells, water hyacinth-based cells, after the lagoon, and it's cleaning the water before it goes into the local creek. Same thing in Fort Deposit, had a lagoon, and you notice they have to aerate. That's an aeration machine. They have to aerate the lagoon to get that oxygen down to the bacteria underneath. So Fort Deposit added a big constructed wetland. The manager of this told my son that the water, when it leaves the wetland, is like spring water. It's drinkable. And to look at a couple of their results here, their BOD, they need to be under the permit limit here, NPDES permit, and you see that when the water leaves the lagoon, often during the year it's not below that limit. When it leaves the wetland, it is. Here's their total suspended solids. Again, the water leaving the lagoon and then leaving the constructed wetland. Robertsdale, on the way down to Gulf Shores, they have treatment going on here at the wastewater treatment plant, treatment up behind me, and they needed some additional treatment, so what they did was they added a water hyacinth cell there to further treat the water as it moved on through the wastewater system. Laverne, notice the fence around the lagoon. All the lagoons will have fences around them because that's nasty water. You don't want people or animals to really get to it. But around the constructed wetland, you don't have a fence. And what they have is a water hyacinth system. This is in wintertime. They remove the water hyacinths out of this area, and they let them stay in the greenhouses during the winter because they don't need as much cleaning. And then when the end of winter, they just open the boards that are on hinges here, and they propagate themselves out all the way down the wetland. And there's where we're looking at the greenhouses. Turned around and took this picture at the greenhouses at the end there. And when I took the picture at the end of these greenhouses, before the water went into the creek, duckweed had taken up naturally here, and a turtle was swimming around fat and happy there in the clean water. Camp Hill, just up the highway here off 280, you've got a constructed wetland. You can see that it's duckweed based, running the water through all the wastewater from the town of Camp Hill. And then I mentioned that a large city like Birmingham it's got a lot of wastewater. You can clean it. As a matter of fact, out in some of the desert states out southwest, they do have wetlands that are cleaning millions of gallons of water per day, nothing but a wetland cleaning from big cities, because they've got the room to put all those cells. We don't often, but what you can do is polish the water. So from the North Shelby County wastewater treatment plant, the pipe comes here. It then goes into a natural wetland. Storm drains also come into that wetland, cleaning the water. This is just a naturally occurring wetland to polish that water. We used to think that stormwater couldn't be used, you couldn't use constructed wetlands for cleaning stormwater because you have a rain event, and then you have dry spell, and then rain, then dry spell. But actually, wetlands go through a dry, wet, dry cycle. And when you look out at a wetland, it's not always wet. It may be very dry. And that's part of what helps to create that hydric soil, is this cycle. And so with the plants are used to that, and the plants handle and tolerate that. So with stormwater, you want to slow it down a little bit so that it'll settle down to the root system of the plants where the cleaning can take place, and then it does and moves on. The different ways that stormwater can be cleaned. With wetlands, you've got sediment trapping. We'll see examples of that, chemical detoxification, nutrient removal, etc. And then some of the stormwater that's being cleaned by constructed wetlands in Alabama. We'll see several of these, but there's also additional ones, especially up in the Birmingham area, that's cleaning wastewater. The Bay Bears Stadium, Hank Aaron Stadium, Mobile, they built a big, huge parking lot with the new stadium. They were concerned about the runoff going directly into the local creek here. And so they came and put a catch basin here, and then they put planted wetland plants in there. So that is not only cleaning the water, it's cooling the water before it goes into the natural stream. One time when I was there, the pavement had given way right next to the wetland that's here, and this shows sediment trapping. You can see how the dirt had washed into the wetland, but it was held by the plants, and now the workmen can go in and easily remove that. Whereas if it hadn't been for the wetland, that would have gone directly into the creek and into the environment. University of South Alabama golf course. This is Mobile Bay here. Golf course is right on the edge of Mobile Bay. They came into a low spot here and built a constructed wetland and built it in amongst the cypress trees already existing there. And so not only do the plants that they put in, but also the cypress trees are helping clean that water until it goes about 15 feet into Mobile Bay. At the estuarium at Dolphin Island, they've got concrete here that you drive on, but then you park and the water from the concrete runs off into this area, and it's in essence concrete blocks turned up on the edge with sand in between, and they collect the water underneath there and take it to a constructed wetland before it goes into Mobile Bay, which is right there. Brook Highland Shopping Center up in Birmingham on Highway 280. You can see all the stormwater comes and goes into this constructed wetland here. A little bit interesting design here. They needed the depth to collect the amount of water, but they didn't want people, maybe kids, coming and playing here and wandering out into the water, into deep water. So they built a shallower shelf all the way around it, and the shallower shelf allowed them to put wetland plants, because wetland plants wouldn't function out here in the deep water. So they got wetland plants here. Another incident when I took this picture up here at this corner, sediment trapping here that the wetland plants are doing. St. Francis Xavier Church up in Birmingham, wetland plants here, cattails, all the stormwater, and indeed the stormwater coming off of the city streets through a ditch also comes into here, willow trees, and they're thriving. Subdivision in Birmingham, stormwater pipe comes in. You see the plants growing here, the cattails all around here. No fence, not harmful. It's an amenity for the subdivision. Southern Progress up in Birmingham, they capture all of their stormwater and roof runoff. They take it through a constructed wetland, a 3-cell system, and it's got cattails and lotus plants. Lotus flowers are beautiful in the June time period. Stuart Perry offices is a new one. The parking area and the walking paths are all porous paving. They're not even paving, they're porous crushed rock. And then the ditches in between those, they put cattails and wetland plants in, so the water runoff is being cleaned before it goes into the lake on their property. And you can see they have a patio out back, but what they did was they have grassy areas in amongst the stones there, so the water runs into the ground instead of directly off of the patio. So in my talk, I also go through a whole bunch of coal mining applications, but I want to compress that a little bit and just show you a couple of things. But for you to understand, and if anybody's interested in the coal mining part of it, afterwards I can show you some of that. But I wanted you to understand that coal mining waste is one of the best things that can be cleaned by plants. Cattails especially tolerate it and really take the pollutants out of the water. So we've got a bunch in Alabama that's doing that, and then we'll look at electricity generating steam plants that use coal. This is what happens around a coal mine. This is a creek. The iron comes in, the manganese, iron oxide, it rusts when it hits the atmosphere. But anytime you see the milky color around coal mines in the water, that's aluminum. And it's a bad kind of aluminum that attaches to fish gills and suffocates them. So you want to clean all that up. This is just an example of one up in northeast Alabama. You can see the water coming into the wetland is got that iron oxide color, but already in the first cells it's turned to a pretty color, visually showing that the iron is being removed. And farther down, when we were there, this is a flyway for the ducks and geese migrating. They were all over the place enjoying this nice water. And this is a little bit deeper, just past this cell, a little bit deeper area, and this water is so clean that the staff have stocked it with brim and bass, and they catch fish out of here. And you can see there's even more cells on farther. There's an example of a electricity generating plant that's based on coal. You've got a big coal pile. This is the Black Warrior River. So any runoff from that coal pile used to go right into the river. So then they came in and captured that, and they pumped that up to a wetland up here, which you can see as cattails, and then bring it into the Black Warrior River. If they need additional cleaning, they can divert it and run it through additional wetland cells here before it goes into the river. Some examples of schools that are using constructed wetlands throughout Alabama. We'll see some just for you to see that there's even more. This is Phillips High School up in Bear Creek, Alabama. It's right on the edge of Bear Creek that people canoe and kayak. Notice a fence around it. The reason they have a fence is to keep people from stealing the plants. So that's the other reason to put a fence around a wetland. They have a variety of plants they're using. And here's their permit limit. The water coming out of a little package plant with the high school was not clean enough. And then here they are after it leaves the wetland. Same thing here for their phosphorus before it gets to the wetland and afterwards. And their bacterial content is down here at 0. That chart is at 0, cleaned by the plants. Pineapple, Alabama, south of Montgomery Elementary School has a constructed wetland on site cleaning the water. And then Maddox Middle School put in one to clean the parking lot runoff and the roof runoff from the school. There's a town creek here, and they've got a 2-cell. You notice it doesn't have any plants in it. Well, they were all very proud. The city was proud of it. The guy who sprays and kills the plants with spray didn't quite understand what was going on, so he comes around and he killed every one of the wetland plants, and the city was so upset. I'm not sure he'll be spraying much anymore. Anyway, they have now replanted, and it's going well. But here what they've got is a little 2-cell with connector here, and at that connector is a simple spillway that allows the water, when it gets up, to go on into the creek after it's been cleaned. Low tech, don't see any machinery, don't see any pumps. It's doing its job. Bride Elementary School up in Muscle Shoals, they have a little fish pond, and they needed to clean that water, and so they put in a constructed wetland next to it to clean the fish pond water and to educate the students about what's going on there. The Ecoscape at Birmingham Southern College, they have the low area just before the water leaves that whole area of Birmingham Southern, and the soccer fields and the fertilizer and all goes into the city storm drain here, but before that they've got wetland plants planted there to clean that water. The University of Alabama Wetland Laboratory is located as a greenhouse on top of the biology building in Tuscaloosa, and they have these vats, and a whole bunch of them, I'm just showing a couple of them, that have a water wheel, and they can move different types of water with different pollutants and different organisms through at different speeds, and put in different plants to see what's clean, which plants will clean the water at what flow rates, etc. So a lot of research there. And the University of West Alabama has a training for installers and engineers on the alternative methods of wastewater treatment. One of them is a constructed wetland. They didn't put any plants because the engineers want to kick the gravel around and see what the pipes look like, and so they can go back and design some. Then we'll look at some other uses, a variety of other uses, constructed wetlands, agricultural, parks, golf courses, educational, industrial, and we're just seeing a part of these. There's even more out there than we can show today. Rich's Barbecue, they're a block off of 280 in Harpersville. All the wastewater from the restaurant, kitchen and bathrooms come into a wetland. This is when they're just planting the plants. That was after the growth. You can't see it well, but the giant bulrush is about 10 feet high here. Again, really thriving. They put in about 10 species of plants there. Molten, Dairy Queen at Bolton came out in the back. The wastewater from the Dairy Queen goes into 2-cell constructed wetland, but also the cattails took up naturally in the ditch here next to the wetland, so they're cleaning the water that runs off of the parking lot also. Priester's Pecans on I-65 south of Montgomery have wetland cells that are cleaning the water from that pecan processing plant. Huntsville Botanical Gardens they clean the maintenance workers' restroom wastewater instead of having to pump it all the way back up to the welcome building. They just put in a wetland. They're a plant facility, so they've got signage that tells everybody what the different plants are. Can you tell cell 1 and cell 2? Ruffner Mountain put in one for educational purposes on their property where they've got some mining waste. And so it's a 2-cell, and they have a boardwalk over it and paths walking around it to educate the students. And Sand Mountain Agricultural Experiment Station up at Crossville, up on top of Sand Mountain, they have a 500 pig per year parlor wastewater, and that's in these lagoons, and it wasn't cleaning the water much at all, so they came in and put a 10-cell constructed wetland. And those cells are cleaning the water so well, they then capture it. You can see the wetland here. They capture that water and pump it back up on the facility to reuse it on the experiment station. At the caretaker's house, they came in and put a constructed wetland to clean the water from the caretaker's house. This is just after they put the plants in. You can see the plantings there. And this is about the kind of size that you would want for a single-family, small single-family home. The Poultry Research Unit here at Auburn needs some more information as whether this is still in existence and where it is, so I can go GPS it, add it into my database. But I understand that that facility has some constructed wetlands cleaning the poultry water waste. Porch Creek Indian Reservation, a lot of agricultural work going on at the reservation, and so they capture that as stormwater, agricultural waste, bring it into a 3-cell constructed wetland. And the students at the reservation they help build this, they help put the plants in, they do the water testing, so they're learning about this as they go. Hartselle, downtown Hartselle has a park. It's got a polluted creek going through it, and so they capture some of the water, pump it up into these wetland cells that are a part of the park. You can see the walking paths here, pervious walking paths, and they are cleaning that water, and then it goes back into the creek as cleaned water. This is an RV park north of Montgomery. Up on a mound here, they've got a constructed wetland cleaning the water from the RV park. This is a rockweed filter down at Degussa Chemical Plant. All of the organic chemical waste come from the factory and go into this constructed wetland. See the plantings here, and then after it's in operation, this is wintertime, but the plants are still functioning. And you can see it's a lined system with the rocks in it. Camp Meadowbrook up near Coleman had an old swimming pool they'd no longer needed. They divided it and made a constructed wetland out of it. And then TVA up in Muscle Shoals at their research facility uses reciprocating constructed wetlands, and they put those in a lot up in North Alabama. And again, a fence is around this because it's a park, remote area, keep people from stealing the plants. Then let's look at some roadside natural stormwater wetlands. And the reason I want to show you some of this is as you drive around on the highways to keep your eye out for wetland plants and to understand what they're doing. So we'll look at some of the roadside areas. This is in Cahaba Heights up near Birmingham. You can see the water from any runoff from the gas and oil leaking out of cars and automobiles is going directly into storm drains, but you've got some wetland plants here that are cleaning that water as it moves through the environment. Same thing, Highway 79 north of Tarrant, wetland plants, cleaning water coming off of the service station as well as off of Highway 79 over here. Oakman City Hall has a, quote, drainage ditch running through downtown. There's the City Hall. But wetland plants have taken up there and are cleaning that water. You can see what happens in the wintertime. They sort of go dormant. They get laid over by the water. Spring comes, they pop right back up with new growth. When I took this picture, there was a little boy on the bridge here catching fish out of the quote, drainage ditch. Wildwood Shopping Center near Birmingham, some dirt slid down off of the side of the hill there and collected in the concrete drain, but the cattails took advantage of that and took hold, and now this is their growth more recently, and you can see that they're cleaning that stormwater as it goes through there. And this shows how they propagate. In addition to seeds, they'll stick out a runner, new plant, runner, new plant. And then this is that same spot showing the trash trapping that wetland plants can do as the water goes through. Trace Crossings, subdivision in Birmingham, cattails taking up in the ditches here next to the roads, and some of the concrete drains off the roads actually end in a little constructed wetland there, cleaning it. The Birmingham Shuttlesworth Airport, western end of the runway, of course hydrocarbons, whatever's on a runway washes off, and here are wetland plants that are cleaning that right next to the runway. Near the Brookwood Mall in Birmingham, it's a Shell station next to the mall. Little depression here, and the cattails took up there. The I-20, I-59 interchange in Birmingham, where you come around the curve there near the airport, this is just concrete ditches here. But enough dirt gathered there that the wetland plants and willow trees took up home there. And then this is the south of Hartselle on I-65 below Decatur. And the first time I stopped here, I saw this wetland here. This is the water source for that. It's just a drainage pipe coming out from under the interstate. So apparently when they built the interstate, they put a spring underground and piped it away from under the interstate. So that's the only water source there is. But the first time I was there, the mowing machines had been there, the big tractors that the Department of Transportation uses. So they were cutting the slope here, got down into the wetland. Of course, it's loose, wet soil, so they started miring up and they had to back off. But when you're finished on this side and you want to go to the other side, the fastest way to do that is just drive right through the wetland. So they did a number on it. Now we'll see some of these same sites a year or a few years later. Cahaba Heights, apparently somebody figured that these wildflowers and wetland plants were harming the environment and slowing the stormwater down, so they ripped them all out, and therefore the water coming off the service station now is just going through without being cleaned. Same thing, Highway 79, this is very recent, came in and just cut it all down, get rid of all those plants. Although Birmingham Airport, apparently they were afraid that terrorists would hide in amongst the weeds or whatever, so they just removed all that, I guess, for security and safety purposes. Now nothing is getting clean that comes off the interstate, off the runway. The Brookwood Mall, Homewood City apparently decided these tall weeds were ugly, so they cut them. But this is new growth. This is all those same wetland plants, those same cattails, coming back up as new growth. But then if you keep cutting it long enough, often enough, it becomes grass, and today it's just a mud hole, where before it was a wetland that was cleaning the water. And then the Hartselle, the exit just south of Hartselle, the next time I stopped there, the next year, the mowers had gotten all down into the wetland, but this is new growth. All these plants you see here is new growth. And they got nearly up to the water source, but not quite to the water source. And then another year, they got all the way up to the water source here, but this is new growth. These are the same plants struggling and coming back. Then I guess the state of Alabama figure, the Department of Transportation said, we'll take care of those plants. And so they came in and just scraped them all out, got rid of them, I guess because the mowers were miring down. But the plants came back. You can see the growth here, wetland plants, cattails, and then another time, even more growth there. The I-20, I-59 interchange in Birmingham, they came in and designated that as a wildflower management area. The first thing they did after putting the sign up was remove all the wildflowers. removed all the cattails, all the willow trees. You can see the scrape marks here, the machinery that went down and scooped all that out. However, when I took this picture, there were lots of minnows swimming around here, little bitty tiny fish trying to eke out a living there. And later the plants came back. The plants came back, the willow trees, the cattails, and these, you can't tell, but each one of the little dark smudges there is the fish. And so I guess part of the take-home message is to leave Mother Nature alone, and she'll take care of a lot of things. Oh, I can't believe I left this slide in. I've often thought that what I ought to do is have some signs printed up, keep them in the back of my car. Whenever I see one of these roadside wetlands, stop and stick a sign up, saying wetland at work, cleaning water, do not mow. Of course, that's totally illegal to put on the highway right-of-way, so none of you saw this slide, okay? So what's the future for constructed wetlands in Alabama? As you've seen, there are more that I need to visit and photograph. There are wetlands being planned, Railroad Park in Birmingham, developments in Birmingham, Village Creek and Tallapoosa Street Park, God Pile at 5 Mile Creek, cleaning coal mining waste, on-site decentralized system for subdivisions. Volkert and Associates, Kevin White, the University of South Alabama, has worked with Volkert and Associates in Mobile, and they have sort of a package concept that they sell to developers, that they have shown that it costs so much less money, it saves the development cost if they will put a constructed wetland on site and then pipe the water from the septic tanks to there, because they only have to use 2-inch pipe instead of putting big 4-inch or bigger pipes going out to the road and then pay to have that connected to the county sewer system or whatever with big, huge sewer mains. They can do something on site. They can bring it out of a septic tank with a 2-inch PVC, and it costs them a whole lot less. So he's working with them. So will more be built in Alabama? And maybe only we are the answer to that. So thank you. Thanks.